Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar for the Best Publisher UX Award 2022 finalists. So before we get started, I just want to say a little bit about the award. So we set up the award 3 years ago to showcase best practice that publishers are demonstrating with their UX innovations. So this is really an opportunity for publishers to show how they're putting end users at the heart of their user design and their service design. So without further ado, I'm now going to introduce you to some of the speakers. So the running order, so first off, we'll be hearing from Sundar Venkatachalam, who's co-founder and CTO of nkoda, and Mike Newman, who is Institutional Partnerships Director from nkoda, and they'll be giving an update on their UX innovation since they won this award last March. We will then go on to introduce you to Alex Evans, who's Lead Product Owner for Academic Research Platforms at Cambridge University Press. And then finally, we'll hear from Matt Bellaro, who's the Senior Manager UX Design at Gruyter, and Chris Rimmer, who is Technical Lead for 67 Bricks. And then we will take all the questions at the end. So I will stop sharing my screen now, and I'll pass you over to Sundar.
Okay, so I just wanted to start just before I hand over to Sundar, who's going to kind of take you through some of the changes since last year UX-wise in a bit more detail, as well as some broader context in terms of what's changed across the business. Just wanted to quickly give a bit of background as to what nkoda is and what it is that we do institutionally. So the core of what we are is a music resource, digital sheet music library at its core, and also, as we'll come on to, a kind of a very sophisticated kind of score viewing tool as well. We basically license the content from over 140 music publishers, ranging from kind of massive multinational publishers of sheet music through to sort of a large conglomerates, all the way through to specialized and sort of boutique publishers. And we deliver this content, you know, whether it's both the sort of ordinary sales catalog you can purchase, the rental materials also available. So in practice, what that means is what sort of full sets of orchestral parts, large ensemble material that typically publishers would have musicians rent for performance. So this is kind of the first time people can access this in a digital context. And then also, of course, also the educational materials. It's accessible across all kinds of different platforms, so iOS, Android, Mac, Windows 10, even Chromebook, and there's also a web platform too. And we work with a range of different institutions. So we work with sort of independent schools here in the UK, as well as a large number of conservatoires in the UK, Europe, US, Canada, Asia too, and the same for sort of universities, academic institutions. All of them are using it in a variety of ways. So obviously, conservatoires will use something like nkoda on the kind of individual student level, as well as in kind of one-to-one sessions with teachers, group settings, whether it's classroom, academic context, or kind of larger performance context too. Of course, for universities and schools, the same applies, but slightly more of a leaning towards a more classroom-based use. And again, this kind of the scope and the scale of the catalog is one of the major factors in kind of their interest in nkoda, but also the really sophisticated, as I say, score viewing, annotation functionality, etc., which will be outlined in a bit more detail in a minute. Yeah, I think at this point it's probably the best thing to do just to hand over to Sundar. I just wanted to give a quick bit of background there, but Sundar will now take you through kind of some of the details.
Cool. Thank you, Mike. And to start with, thank you, Open Events, for giving us this opportunity to talk to you guys, and also thank you for the last year's award. So it was all good. Thank you. Okay, so just to start with, we are nkoda. So I just want to go through a few of these kind of topics, and some areas I will spend more time so that at least I think I can add some value about how we do it. Like explain about our processes. If it is used, it can be related to another project, it will be good. And so I will focus on those areas. But even just to give a background who we are, I think I will start from that kind of storyline so that you know who we are. And when we talk about products, you will be able to relate better. So we'll start with why do we exist? So prior to nkoda, the music publishing industry has had several pain points, and one of the biggest thing is they never had a secure digital platform or distribution platforms available. And traditionally, music publishers they themselves consider themselves as a print houses. There are huge factories, and print kind of activities was their main as a business they do. They couldn't consider themselves as more digital or copyright oriented businesses because of that big asset, big liabilities. They kind of traditionally continue to be a print house. And because of that, even though the world has changed, moved into kind of digitalization of content, they couldn't quickly jump into that bandwagon, and partially maybe a lack of technology. Traditionally, they are not well known for technological advancement, etc., etc. So we kind of continue, even if you think about it, nkoda started in 2016 kind of time. So even that sort of time, there was not a single global distribution platform. If you consider the similar sort of time, Spotify was around for audio music, so digitalization of audio music happened, and again the pain point was almost similar, the piracy in audio music, which kind of led into this iTunes of the world, iTunes, Spotify, all of the kind of audio platforms came into play, similar sort of timeline, and the same problems music publishing industry also had it. The piracy was a big part of it. And there is no independent kind of solution provider. So each publishers worked as a silo. So it again lacked the innovation. And from a consumer end, obviously, there's not a single digital access point. Like if a musician would need to find a material, they had to go through individual, shops might not have all the materials. So if they want to contact to a specific or special material, they had to contact the publisher, which again, it's not a easy logistics around it. So fundamentally, from a consumer side, they kind of ended up having some poor quality, poor photocopies, or they, without them realizing it, they kind of go into this kind of piracy aspect. That somebody kind of prints up, photocopies it, and they will use that. It might have a right content, right pages. So fundamentally, from both sides, whether it's the publisher side or whether it's the consumer side, there was a big pain point, and that is the bit which we luckily identified, and we wanted to kind of resolve that kind of get into that market and solve the problem. And we started nkoda. So it was in 2016 we kind of started and kind of started looking into what we can do to add value to this industry. So it was apparent that a single kind of a hub or single digital ecosystem has to be made for musicians in order to tackle this problem. So we created nkoda. And initially, I will come to this. Some of this kind of changes happened over the years about the product in a minute. But as a product, initially started as a music distribution platform, and the core of that is our own proprietary format called KDA, and which actually gives a kind of peace of mind to the publishers, so that they were able to provide all the materials they have. If you think about it, that is their asset. It's a billion-dollar business where they all happily, they trusted us as a provider, and they kind of provided, they gave us that content. We converted those content and kind of distributed through this platform. So what it actually helped is to have a kind of a global distribution channel for the publishers. It also allows us to be this kind of an independent aggregator where all the publishers could potentially provide the data through, and we will make sure that the quality is met. We'll make sure that the metadata are correct. We kind of did end-to-end kind of distribution through our platform. And from a consumer end, and it is even, it became the single point of access point for any music. And some of the materials, they have never ever hoped that it would be available on the through any platform, because some of the things may be that it was not discoverable before. Some of the things was the fact that the publisher has never had a published books or anything like that, materials outside. So a lot of materials which came through the product, which people were so happy to see through this kind of product, are accessible. They would have heard about it, they wouldn't have had access to it. So that then made this kind of single point of access, and the tools we created which enable them to actually, all the musicians use music in so many different ways. So a fluid, ecosystem where they could actually annotate and kind of utilize that for rehearsals and things like that was again an important factor. So we kind of tackle that, and the quality, as we mentioned before, we make sure that the quality is very high, and all the metadata around it's available, etc. So overall, we were lucky enough to be fixing that problem in the industry of that lack of a single provider, and we kind of achieved that by, I think we started in 2016. By 2018 we were the first platform to kind of handle that many. It's like one of the biggest libraries even now to actually provide that service. So that's the background of nkoda, so that when I move into other areas, you would be able to relate to what we are talking about and things like that. So so just to kind of go into the next topic, which this is the main part of this webinar, whether I wanted to talk about a little bit about what we actually presented last time as well. So I will kind of go through some of the UX and processes and methodologies we talked about in the last year's kind of presentations, but I will just touch upon that, and also will add on what else we kind of did to kind of move into the innovation in the UX kind of scene. So as most of the organizations with these days kind of follow this kind of design thinking, where we have different kind of processes. We kind of I will come to the user empathy and the empathizing kind of users need in more detail in the coming slides. But the process is simple, and we kind of try to identify users' needs and kind of understand how it impacts them, or what are the priorities around it. Then we'll ideate around it, and we'll also create prototypes and again test that. So this becomes a kind of a continuous cycle. Not necessarily it is in that kind of continuous stages. It might actually move back and forth in many different directions, so that when we are ready to build a product which is designed or targeting to the corresponding segment of the user base. So it is all about the identifying and a kind of constant pivoting as well to kind of cater the needs of the customers. And that's why the user empathy part I will come back and highlight more and more. I believe again, most of the people in the UX industry will believe that as well. Yes, we have different parts of UX where like for example, definition of identifying it, analyzing it, all these are important, but I would say the thing which actually adds value, or the thing which leads us to do better job, is having that user empathy. And I will also talk a little more in where the user empathy is actually expanding into not only just the product, not only just the actual implementation process. It's across the business as well. Again, I will touch upon that. So user empathy being this focus here in end-to-end is the core of what I believe makes any product which is aligning to the user's needs. So similar back to the other areas, like the ways we capture information. We have a product survey. We do a lot of product surveys. Every time we have any kind of feature request comes through, even if there's a sales team is kind of gathering that information from the organizations, whether it's a B2C coming through the customer service or any sort of sources, we identify that there is something about the product, it has to be changed, or there is a new requirements needed to be created. We do product surveys and we identify what are the things correctly we need to ask. And there are a lot of iteration goes through to actually identify what is the best way to gather the information we need, and not actually making that as a pain point for the end users to provide that information. So it has to be concise, it has to be measurable, etc., etc. And luckily we are blessed with lots of musicians inside the business. So we have an inside, I'm also mentioning it here. We have an in-house expertise. So it actually allows in so many different ways. They are the target customers for this product, and majority of the business may not have this opportunity because they will have a team of people and they may be creating a completely product for another kind of industry, whereas we are lucky enough to have again, 80% of the staff are musicians. So it becomes natural to them that we are all working in the product. Not only they may have a different job title, whether it's sales, marketing, or PR, or any kind of title, but they're all working in the product one way or other. So that actually helps us. So as I said, the product surveys are also kind of reviewed and created by musicians. And then we have a community engagement. We have a big community of happy users, we call it, and they allow us to kind of identify any drawbacks of the platform or anything they want to see in the next releases, etc. So it's a kind of continuous engagement with them, which actually enables us to gather more information. Currently, it is actually going kind of slightly lower than what we had engagement before, but we are actually bringing that back up again, and we have a big plans in 2022 to kind of scale that community back up. So that's one of the ways we gather information. Other areas, like we do one-to-one interviews from selected musicians, so that we can actually spend more time sitting with them, understanding how they use it, understanding their pain point, actually one-to-one, and it actually allows us to again gather more information, because some of the assumptions which actually comes out of this surveys or anything like that, it might be again hypothesis, or it may be just analysis kind of outcome, but some of the things are predictions, whereas there is nothing matching the one-to-one experience of understanding directly from the musician, saying that I'm using this platform this way, how can I use it, or all this their use cases. Maybe one person has a completely different use case than another person, so we just need to understand more. So having such one-to-one interviews actually helps us. And we have a product focus group as well, and for some of the things we have a kind of globally available product group, so we make sure that it is actually they are all distinct or or mutually exclusive kind of a skill set in there, that product focus group, so that we can gather different type of viewpoints of any same particular feature. So we kind of tend to kind of get very interesting kind of insights into how people perceive one single feature, but in different, based on the different location, different culture, different use cases, they are all coming different approaches. So these kind of focus group actually again adds more data points into understanding what exactly we are to be building, etc. So, and then all this information, as we mentioned before, maybe this actually happens just after the information is captured, or maybe it will go through a full workflow of creation or prototype, then goes back into the user base, then again getting another survey. So there is no direct order in terms of this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or anything like that. It can happen in different stages of the product surveys or any of these kind of different definition stages. So, but we do time to time based on the areas of interest as well. Some places where we would know based on the nature of the survey itself will define what to be done. But some cases we may have to kind of segment the user surveys, because if the data is larger and if it's coming from the user data set we capture internally as well, like we have lots of behavioral patterns identification mechanisms in place from a technology perspective, which actually provides a lot of data. Sometimes we find that the data is so huge we are kind of struggling to actually hypothesis on it, but we are introducing a lot of processes and people like a data science kind of approaches into place, so that we can start understanding more from our data as well. So these are the ways we actually identify and again giving that user empathy and understanding what is required for the user. And in order to support
Sundar, sorry to rush you, but we need to move on to the other speakers. Are you able to sum up in the next minute or so, please?
Oh, it's 1 minute. Okay, so maybe I'll just quickly go through this kind of some of these areas as well. And speed up on that. So theoretically, so we have different platforms to allow us to provide the prototyping and any sort of testing through different again tool set. Again, some of the tools you would have been already using. So just an example. So the important point I wanted to touch upon was this, and then I will stop that conversation here. So the bridge between physical and digital world is the bit I wanted to kind of touch upon more. So where the idea of user UX in majority of the businesses, it becomes like a starting of identifying something and creating a feature requirement than building it. So there might most likely be a kind of gap between how it is being delivered from a technology perspective or implementation perspective, which I again in our kind of again we could call it a UX innovation, where we are actually focusing much on how we can bridge the gap between the digital experience versus the physical experience. So we try to identify much of the typical user behavior in the physical world and try to translate that into a digital experience. So some of the things you can see, in our new products, we have done in such a way that we, rather than providing a particular feature, we actually think about, rather than us deciding this feature is going to be X and Y, that this is going to behave like this, we try to provide as much as flexibility as possible so that user will take care of that decision. So that decision can be about how the environment of a product is kind of behaving, how individually, how the user can actually go through one particular journey. That can also be completely fluid because of the decoupling nature of it. So that's why I kind of wanted to kind of highlight here, like the decoupling aspects start from the UX design, and the decoupling is also implementation decision, and decoupling actually allows to the technology architecture as well. We thought all of them working in hand, that way of fluidity we cannot provide it. Again, the importance of fluidity is it's a factor that where the user makes the product their own than you deciding that this is what the user journey we expect. So I think this part, I wanted to go further, but I think considering the time limitations, I might actually switch to the next one and just to kind of wrap it up as well. Here, again, coming across the earlier suggestion I was talking about, the user empathy is the main theme of everything we do. And as I said, that user the implementation decoupling or architecture decoupling I was talking about is also because of this user empathy, because we don't want to make a product which is decided by us. We want to make a product which is being used and kind of configured by themselves. So we enable the platform and let the user make it useful for their own environment, their own use cases, etc. So that is the part of it.
Thank you, Sundar.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Sorry, I think we're going to have to move on now to, thank you very much for your presentation. Very interesting, but we're going to have to move on now to Alex Evans from Cambridge University Press. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Oh, hang on. Something's going on. Give me a second. There we go. Has that gone through now?
Perfect.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Okay, cool. So today I'm here to talk about Cambridge Core and our recent content page redesign. It was a project that we sort of kicked off towards the end of 2020, middle to late 2020. And we set out with the objective of moving our HTML content from our previous reader to the abstract landing page for our articles, chapters, and elements, providing full text HTML in line with the abstract. The main reason for deciding to do this was we wanted to remove an additional click for the user in accessing the HTML content. We also wanted to try and ensure that we were offering the best experience for reading academic content online. When we set out on the project, we established 4 main objectives. These were improving the online reading experience, increasing our users' understanding of their access, enhancing our full text HTML, and increasing content usage. When we establish our objectives, we do it using OKRs, or objective key results. The idea being that we define the objective, we can clearly state the key results that we want to achieve from it, and then we can look at the measures we need to put in place to measure success. An example would be with increased content usage, we might want to improve the engagement of HTML content by 10%. From that, we know that we need to introduce a new usage event that allows us to track the engagement with the content. Let me talk to you a little bit about the process and approach. So this slide doesn't really do it justice. This is not a linear process as it appears on the slide, but actually multiple of these things can be happening at the same time. It's also worth noting that between the design and the user testing stages that we have multiple iterations of that, which is why you have those circular arrows in there, because we do design sprints to understand how our users would interact with the page and adapt the designs accordingly, whilst we're delivering and then ultimately measuring the success. And I'll also mention that when we measure success, it doesn't always go back straight into design. It can go back to any part of this process. So moving on from this process, I'll talk a little bit about the research that we did for this. And this was really the science and practicalities of online reading. There were two things that we gleaned from our research. The first is that when a user can see several text areas available simultaneously, it often allows them to form an easier overview, and that's what you get in the context of print reading. We also found through our research that, generally speaking, we use different parts of our brain when reading print content versus digital content. This allowed us to establish best practices, things like line height and length, font size and selection, but also the structuring for content digitally, both mobile and in a web browser. We also wanted to make sure that we were designing for disability, making sure that our platform was as accessible as possible, and we are WCAG 2.1 compliant as of yesterday. So moving on from the scientific research, we then wanted to engage directly with our users. To do this, we did a card sorting exercise in the first instance, where 37 external participants, both researchers and authors, took part in basically what I refer to as top task analysis. This is when we give the user a series of tasks and functions that would be on the content page and ask them to categorize them from very important to not relevant. As we did this, we discovered there were specific categories we could use, like navigation or access, to categorize some of their feedback. And we managed to ascertain a list of key observations. Just a few of these were 97% of the people rated the PDF download was very important, 70% rated see other content by author as important, and 68% considered search within content as very highly as well. The one thing about that piece was when we did user testing later on, we actually discovered there was an embedded behavior within the user's browser. They tended to use Control F rather than any search field that we placed on the content page. We also wanted to do industry analysis, and I've referred to this as industry analysis and not competitor analysis because this wasn't just looking at competitors. This was looking at content hosting platforms as a whole. We wanted to cast a wider net to see how other content hosting platforms were publishing content online. Some of the key observations and actionable insights from this were things like how other sites were using sticky headers or sidebars to allow key information or navigation to follow a user down the page. So as they continue to engage with the content, they could quickly navigate between content. And you'll see that later on when I demo the designs quickly. So from here, we went into the design and iteration phase. This was where we were running design sprints. And you can see as I go through these screens, the number of iterations that we had. On the left-hand side of each design, you can see the comments and the feedback and the recommendations that we got from the user testing that we did with our users. We finally ended up with a final design, which this one does look like the worst case scenario, but I will tell you that this is not the final design. And with user testing and design, you'll quickly find that there is no final design and you're constantly having to adapt. So how did we do the user testing? Well, user testing was done by a series of hosted video sessions due to the pandemic. And we involved 6 participants, which were both researchers and authors, had done both in their careers. And we asked them to provide their opinion on the usability and relevance of various features on the page prototypes. We also had prototypes that were mocked up in a way in which they could perform a range of tasks on the page, so we could see how they actually interacted with the page. Through the course of these sessions, we were able to group their feedback into things like navigation, access, search, and call to actions. So we could look for actionable outcomes across the entire page, and you'll see that in the design in a minute. Some of the recommendations that came out of this were things that are very obvious when you think about them, but at a content level, users are less interested in understanding the journal banner that a piece of content is in, or submitting material because they've already chosen the piece of content that they want to do literature review of. So these were all recommendations that we pulled out and made it through to our final design. So let me quickly flip over to my browser here so you can see what our new content page looks like. Can you see the content page on my screen now? I'll assume that you can see.
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. So what you'll notice is as I scroll down, this is an open access article, so it means the HTML is on the page by default. As I scroll down the page, you will see that the top navigation locks in place. So as I go down the screen, you can see that I can quickly navigate between figures and supplementary material. If I find a figure that I'm particularly interested in, I can click to view it within the content, and I can immediately be taken to that part of the content. On the non-access version, where I don't have access, you'll see that on the article page, I have this option to check my access or get my access. This drops me down to the access options block and allows me to immediately see how I can check whether I have access. You'll notice as well on the previous reading experience that when I actually engage with the content, everything else is stripped away from the screen. making my focus entirely purposed on reading and not any other information around the page. Coming back to the presentation, let me talk to you about how the implementation went. So with user insights, we wanted to understand how our users had rated the page. What we got here is usability. This is customer satisfaction score. And from when we implemented it in December 2020, for 6 to 7 months following, we saw a gradual and consistent increase on the usability scores we were getting from our customer satisfaction scores, ranging from 3.5 initially all the way up to 4.7 in June. Access didn't have the same effect that we wanted, but I'll come back to that one in a minute. The other thing that I wanted to pull out here was the number of bugs that we recorded through our tool that we integrate with the site called Usabilla. For 4 of the 7 months, you'll notice that we didn't receive a single bug report. And what that means is that our technical implementation hasn't impacted our users' ability to access and engage with the content. So let me come back to access a little bit more. Why was access impacted so badly? Well, there are 2 things. The first is that we started to see a new trend in the sort of feedback we were getting, and we refer to this as open access protest. This is when a user logs in via their institution or via their personal account expecting to get access to an article, but doesn't have access because their institution hasn't purchased it. This leads them to formally submit a complaint through our feedback tools saying, I believe this content should be accessed to researchers, open access to researchers, regardless. And that results in a negative feedback. The other thing was really around terminology and the terminology we're using at the time. When we first implemented the content page and the access block, we used get access as a way of bringing the user down to that access block. But then within the access block itself, the terminology we used was about getting access. That makes the user believe that the interaction that they're making will always result in them getting access. We therefore changed the wording in that access block, and I'm pleased to say that we saw a drastic reduction in complaints from customers over the following months. We delivered the change to the access block using the terminology check access in May 21, and since we've seen a consistent decline in customer contacts. We also wanted to understand how our users were using the page, and so we integrated another tool called Hotjar. Hotjar allows us to see the elements of a page that a user is clicking on. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see a heat map. This shows users interacting with the title, the author details, the get access icon, and ultimately institutional login. They're also focusing on the DOI quite a lot, which isn't unsurprising. On the right-hand side, you can see a video, which allows us to capture anonymous user sessions to see how they're engaging with the content. In this video, you can see how a user was using their cursor, like you would a finger, to go across the page and read the content, showing that the reading experience is probably the correct line length. I also talked earlier about wanting to increase content usage as part of this, and we did. Naturally, moving the HTML content onto the abstract landing page allows us to track the usage event for that content. However, the thing that really surprised us was the engagement. We introduced a new event to track engagement with the page, which means when a user scrolls down a page and starts interacting with elements of the table of contents, or by getting far enough down the page, we track that as content engagement. What really surprised us was that 45% of our users per page per month were generally engaging with the HTML content, which sort of counteracts the point earlier with 97% always wanted the PDF. The thing we have learned is that the engagement often is a reflection of the user checking the content before making the decision to download the PDF and digest it properly later. So what has this project meant for the future? How are we adapting our approach moving forwards? Well, we've embedded an internal UX team into our department, working alongside the previous agile development product teams, giving us a greater focus around user-centered design. We've also learned from the access issue feedback, and we've created a problem aggregator, which allows us to gather problems that are being directly reported to us through our on-site feedback tools. This problem aggregator allows us to understand the problem, both from a quantitative and qualitative point of view, and it allows us to then take that into innovation workshops that we hold internally. And then eventually, if we see that there's a problem that we can solve, we take that to our users to user test. Finally, we've clearly mapped the process, including the stages of engagement across the product, UX, and technology functions. This allows us to clearly show to the business how we need to engage with our customers, how we work, how we design, iterate, develop, iterate, and ultimately deliver product pages that meet our customer needs. Thank you very much for your time. That's me done.
Thanks very much, Alex. That was fantastic. And yeah, please do post your questions in the Q&A box if possible. If you're having any problems with using the Q&A box, then we'll also check the chat box, so no worries there. I'd like to hand over now to Matt Bellaro and Chris Rimmer for their presentation.
All right, let's see if I can share my screen. One sec. It's coming, I swear. There we go. Are you seeing my screen?
We are, thank you.
Yeah.
Very good, thanks. So thank you very much for the invitation. We're pleased to be here. I'm Matt Balara. I'm Senior Manager for UX Design at Gruyter. And Chris, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Chris Rimmer, technical lead at 67 Bricks, and we've been developing the platform alongside the team at De Gruyter. I've been technical lead during the development of the new De Gruyter platform, and as tech lead, my job in terms of user experience is mostly to spoil Matt's day by telling him that his grand new plan is not really feasible from a technical perspective.
That is mostly what Chris does, yeah.
But one of the great things about working with Matt, though, is he's not precious about his designs. He's not precious about his ideas. He takes it on the chin. We sit down and we work out how we can achieve the outcomes that we're looking for. So anyway,
that's also why there are two of us here, because 67 Bricks and De Gruyter have been working pretty much as one team on all of what we've been doing. So let me give you some context. This is what our site looked like towards the end of 2020. And where we were is we were running on third-party software. We were dependent on the supplier of that software, and we had no internal UX or development team. The site was extremely slow loading for users. Because we were dependent on the supplier, we were very slow to react and adapt to anything. And it was really hard for users to even find our product pages, let alone access them. Where we're at now, this is our homepage at the moment. This will be our homepage pretty soon. We're launching a slightly new homepage in the next couple of months. For De Gruyter, UX basically started in 2021. We had at the time one interaction designer who was kind of an internal service provider for anybody that wanted anything digital designed. I started at the beginning of 2021 and started putting it in a bit more of a methodical UX kind of shape. And where we're at now is we have our own self-built, with 67, of course, AWS-based software. We have a small in-house UX team, and we have a number of in-house devs and the 67 devs collaborating with us. Timeline looked something like this. We launched the beta of our new platform in December 2020. We had a feedback collection period where the beta was running parallel to the old platform until February, when we launched the new platform. And we did some intense user research for the next couple of months. And since then, and continuing, we are primarily basing our UX on data-driven insights. We're deploying every 2 weeks, and we have had lots of changes since we launched. So the research and data part of it, when I joined, I had a lot of questions. I've been designing digital products for 25 years, and the first thing I want to know is, who are our users? And nobody could really tell me. Our sales department could tell me what librarians like to buy or how they buy, but they couldn't tell me much about users. Editorial could tell me something about authors as authors, but not as users so much. And what do they need? What do our users need? Lots of people internally had lots of ideas about what they wanted the platform to do, but nobody could really tell me verifiably what users wanted or needed. So I did a bunch of, it wasn't only these 8 people, I wanted to show their faces, but I didn't have time to ask them all if they were okay with that. Excellent interviews, 1 hour contextual inquiry interviews with many, many researchers and librarians and authors in all sorts of disciplines across 8 different countries. And it was really, really simple. I like to let the users talk. And I just asked them, what do you do? Describe it. And now share your screen and show me how you do it. The consistent things that we got out of that are everyone is extremely time poor. They don't have time to mess around with anything confusing. They're very goal oriented. They're looking for something quickly. Everybody manages unbelievable amounts of data, and everyone has access problems. These are just some quotes. You can read them in the recording, but everybody basically said something about how difficult it is to get access, how long it takes, how confusing it is, how they don't understand it. And that became a big thing for us. Now, you'll remember I said we have a small in-house UX team. It's basically me and an interface designer. So this is sort of the story of us starting UX at De Gruyter. I still feel like we're quite at the beginning, but we're doing what we can. So maybe one of the most important things I learned out of doing these interviews is that doing good UX research is a full-time job, and we can't do it. We did a fair bit of it, but in that period, I was doing almost nothing else. So we're hiring a UX researcher. If you are one or know anyone, please email me. We're going to be hiring someone this year. I look forward to having him on my team, and we'll be able to do a lot more, a lot better. So the big question after doing all of that and realizing how time intensive it is was, how can we improve our UX substantially without spending all of that time on research constantly, for now, until we have a researcher? And I started focusing our efforts much more on data-driven insights. So we took all of the feedback that we got through the beta and all of our CS tickets. When I say CS, I mean customer service, and did a thorough analysis of those. We observed user behavior online, and we've been monitoring our analytics. So the beta feedback and CS tickets look like this. They're huge spreadsheets with thousands of little things in them. We grouped them and pulled them together into categories and started trying to prioritize, okay, where do we have real problems? Where do we need to focus? There were a lot of comments like these, which were low-hanging fruit. They were easy, small things that would have a significant user impact that were quite easy to fix. And of course, those have all pretty much been done since launch. The bigger thing was where people, sometimes with very colorful language, told us that they thought they should be able to access something, but they couldn't. And that became a real focus for our work, is how do we make access as understandable as possible and as simple as possible to achieve. So the user behavior observation, Alex already did a really good job of explaining what Hotjar is. So we look at Hotjar basically every sprint, and we can see lots of important things. This is a good example for Hotjar. We launched our new homepage and very quickly saw that over 50% of the people just use the search, which is interesting. Product pages, it becomes really clear where people are focusing. One of the interesting things that Hotjar gave us also was the DOI. Using Hotjar's video function, where it records the movement of the mouse and where the user is clicked, we realized that people were rage clicking, which is essentially a term for click, 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 click. It's a very good indicator of when a user thinks that something should be interactive, but it's not. They click a bunch of times expecting something to happen and nothing does. The tricky thing with DOIs is the DOI, if you're using it from the DOI registry, their definition for using it is it has to be a link. But it's a link to the page that the user is on, which is kind of stupid, but it's not that nothing happens, it's that the user is getting linked over and over again to the page that they're already on. So we actually adjusted that based on Hotjar and made our DUIs not look like links, and rage clicks have more or less disappeared, which is nice. Another example of the crazy things that people do with their mouse when they're reading. The analytics monitoring side of things looks a lot like this. Everybody is probably familiar with Google Analytics. We look in there also pretty regularly. It is desperately unsexy. However, it's also pretty insightful. So one of the things that became really clear from looking at our analytics is a basic conceptual thing, especially if you work in an academic publisher, a business whose business it is to make books. People tend to think about websites similar to a book. It's got a whole bunch of pages and you look at them all. And you start at the beginning and you go through, and that is not at all how websites work. The way they work is people come from Google, they go to a product page, and then they leave. That's basically our primary user interaction, is search engine, product page, gone. So we've been working, we made it a big priority to work on search engine optimization. We've hired a SEO expert who's been helping us a hell of a lot with that, so that we can start trying to create a bit more of a loop. So people are going from search engine to a product page and maybe back to the search engine, but back to a different product page. The other thing is we're working on interaction optimization, which will be launching some features later this year, so that once you're on a product page, maybe you find something else that you might be interested in, you go to another product page and you keep looking. We're trying to make it as easy as possible for users to find the things that they're interested in, preferably on our site. Culture has been a really big thing in starting to integrate UX into Gruyter as a company. This is probably how a lot of my colleagues think of me. My first answer is always no, because we need to stop and think about it. So I kind of live by this quote. Don Norman coined the term user experience, so he should know something about it. And he says, do not solve the problem that's asked of you. It's almost always the wrong problem. And that is, in my experience, absolutely the case. Somebody comes to you and says, we need to do this. You need to ask, why do we need to do that? And really start thinking about what's the reason behind it? What's the thinking behind it? What are the user needs behind it? So start looking at what's the real problem. So very often someone will say, someone complained. And my answer is usually, I don't care. Because if it's only one person, it's interesting and we should keep an eye on it, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a problem. Somebody internally says, we really want this. That also does not, for me, equal a problem we need to solve, because it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the users. Your opinion and my opinion are both meaningless. Nobody's feeling about something internally is very meaningful as far as prioritizing the problems we need to solve. And we need to verify what are our problems with actual data, whether it's observation data, research data, interview data, or analytics. We need to know that there is actually a problem that needs work. We've been doing a lot of collaboration coaching, is how I think of it. It's basically working, when we're working together with other departments, we're trying to impart a lot of our UX thinking into how we think together about the problems. So we're prioritizing by user impact. We have a lot of things we would like to do that don't have a very large impact, and they are at the bottom of our backlog. We don't start working on a solution without understanding the problem. We want to build fast, and this is where 67 comes in and has been super, super helpful. Build fast, then observe and validate, and then adjust. And forget about perfect. We're not trying to get any of this perfect. We're trying to get a better solution online as quickly as possible, and then see how it goes and make it better after that. I kind of in my head have a, is this worth it test? If we're going to start working on something, I want it to be something that helps a lot of users, that provides business value, and preferably that we can build it quickly, or at least break it down into chunks we can build quickly, so that we're constantly getting new and useful things online. We've also been pushing interdepartment collaboration quite a lot, by essentially encouraging departments to own projects. I have seen that having your silos, your department here and your department there, and they're trying to talk to each other, that doesn't actually lead to particularly good collaboration. But what does is integrating that department and this department into a joined agile project team. So what we've managed to do is encourage a lot of people in other departments to become product owners for various projects that we're working on. So we've got a publishing tech manager who's the PO of our entire platform at the moment. Customer service head has become the PO of the internal customer service tool we built. The head of comms is now the PO for our corporate content. So all of our pages explaining how we work and what we do and how we do it. And we have a production manager from our production department, has recently started as PO of our ongoing book workflow projects. And we've done a fair bit of internal communication. So shortly after I started, I gave a presentation to the entire company called UX WTF, because a lot of people have no idea what UX even is and what we do and how we do it. And we've been doing regular updates on how is the platform going and what we know about our users, what we've learned recently, and what we're doing to react to their needs. So far, we've only been doing this for a year, but so far it's we've already got some wins. So we've increased search engine traffic by 200%, which is pretty awesome. A lot of that is thanks to our SEO expert, Samira, who is great. We've increased overall visits by 20%. We've increased page views by 15%. And we have 100% uptime, which sounds like it should be a given, but on our legacy platform, our previous platform, it was absolutely not. We've increased the load speed of the pages over 5 times. And we've increased our online revenue in our web shop by 40%. A lot of these things don't sound like UX things necessarily, but the way I think of it is, if the site's down and nobody can access anything, then we are definitely letting down our users. If they leave the page because they're waiting for the page to load, we're definitely letting down our users. I'd like to briefly highlight one little sort of innovation, I guess, that we came up with, which I'm very proud of. We always show users if they have access. This is still a tricky subject and we're not done with it, but just being able to see I am authenticated in some way, I could have access to something, is useful. So we have a green banner at the top when they are authenticated, with a yellow banner at the top that notifies them that they're not. And we have a link to a page which explains how access works, what access is, and it has dynamic elements that show you, okay, we don't know who you are at the moment, or we do know who you are. We've managed via this kind of access to get you in, and the page goes on. There's also Shibboleth Open Athens. And it explains and gives the user dynamic feedback as to their current state. We have totally unsolicited.
Matt, sorry to interrupt you. We're going to have to wrap up soon so that we've got time for questions.
I am very close to the end.
We've got 5 minutes to the end.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. We got some really good feedback. You can read in the recording. And we show related to the buttons and on the product pages, whether it's licensed or requires authentication. And we were at the beta stage. I defined when I started a concept of baseline UX, And I'd say we're about 80% of the way there. Middle of this year, we hope to be there. We'll be integrating seamless access and other improvements. And then, of course, there's always more we can do to make users even more happy. Thank you very much for your time. Sorry if I went a bit over.
No, that's okay. It's fine. I'm just going to ask our judges now if they want to ask any questions directly. I know there was one from Bryony. Bryony, did you want to say yours out loud, or do you want me to speak for you on here?
I can say it out loud, thank you.
Cool.
I've got a couple of questions for Matt. So the first thing is that I wanted to know a bit more about what you what's going to constitute your UX team, because if it's just one researcher, then it could be there could be all kinds of elements of burnout and that kind of thing.
Yeah, tell me about burnout. Yeah, at the moment, our UX team is, as I said, me and an interaction designer. For this year, it's hopefully going to be me, a interaction designer, and a researcher. It won't probably go much further this year, at least. I'm very conscious of burnout, and because I've been through it myself already. I don't push to get stuff done that we can't get done in a human fashion. I just don't, and I will not be pushing a researcher to do that either. There are so many things I want to do, and they'll get done when we can do them. Yeah. Cool.
There was a question, I think, could be for Alex and for Matt. So how does authentication fit into your UX considerations? I mean, Matt, you've mentioned implementing the seamless access service. Alex, do you want to say a little bit first about how authentication fits into your UX?
Yeah, sure. So access, unlike Matt, is a very big problem for us and every publisher, because users never get educated on the authentication types that we use. They're often in agreements between the institution and the publisher rather than the user and the publisher. So it's very hard for users to understand when they log in, say with their institutional login, why they don't get access to a piece of content. So we too are also integrating with seamless access. We actually have a maintenance alert up on our site right now, which says that it's happening this weekend to a certain extent. So that's great for us to be moving in that direction. It also centers a lot around us trying to understand why we were receiving that negative sort of customer satisfaction score around access and the words and the terminology that we use around it. So as I said, is previously quite often on sites, logging in sort of suggests that you are going to get something by achieving that step by logging in, but it isn't always true because of the relationship that the institution has with the publisher. Again, it's that there are two sort of streams of relationship that we need to manage there. So overall, authentication is a big part of our UX design. We're actually in the process of a project where we are revalidating our entire registration and login process from an account perspective. And we're also, as I said, introducing seamless access.
Yeah, and from my side, I could just say, I know your pain, Alex. Authentication is a mess. Before I started at Gruyter, I'd never worked in academic publishing. And I had a lot of moments where I was like, really? That's the way it works? Oh, wow, that's a mess. It's very, very messy. We've also gotten massive feedback from users, basically, who think I'm authenticated, I should have everything. And they don't really get well, we haven't sold everything to your institution, so of course you don't have everything. Seems obvious to us, but it's totally not obvious to almost all users. I've got a list of things that we still want to do. I mean, seamless access is one of them. I don't think that's a magic pill. It's not going to solve all our problems, but it'll certainly be helpful, and I look forward to us implementing it. But I've got a lot more, which goes much more around wording. Yeah, it's really explaining things, and that's why we created that page. by the way, Alex, please steal that page. I would love to see that page become a standard across academic publishing. Because people keep telling us, oh wow, like no one ever tried to explain this to me before. I get it. So that has helped a lot. We don't get that many complaints. Certainly our access related customer service tickets have gone drastically down for many reasons, but also because people maybe just understand it better.
Thank you, Matt. So another one of our judges would like to ask a question. So I'll hand over to Andy. Andy, are you able to speak your question out loud?
I think so. So it's a question for both Alex and Matt. I'm a UX consultant and trainer, and one of the things I find is when people approach UX, they've already kind of preconceived what the problems are going to be. It was so good to hear you say, Matt, we just let the users talk. I find that so strong and important. So just from each of you, just about going into UX without preconceptions, just your thoughts on that and whether it's difficult, how you manage that.
Do you want me to take that?
Go for it, Alex.
Okay, cool. So yeah, it's very hard because when you go into user testing, well, into the design phase and the problem phase, I have the same problem as Matt. I often have to turn around and say no to people because we want to understand the problem and then we want to articulate it from a user's point of view and actually understand it. Is it a real user problem? So that's sort of where the problem aggregator that I referred to came from. It was this way of us collating problems, not only from directly across the customers, but also from across the business to understand if we do actually have problems. In terms of the actual kind of interaction with users, when we go into a user test, we are wanting to be proven wrong almost. Like we are wanting people to turn around and say, you've got this wrong, this is, or find problems with the designs, because of it's by finding those problems that we gain a better understanding of our users and their behaviors. And I think that there's a lot to say about how behavioral psychology plays into how people interact with platforms on a daily basis. And it's something that I've been certainly focused around a lot more recently, understanding, how people get cues and cravings and what their response and reward is as a result of that. And we need to make sure that when people are coming into the platform, that they have the right, so that they want to come back. So yeah, we really try to listen to our users. We try to take on board what they're saying. We don't go in with any preconceived notions that we have the right idea to begin with. As I said, we're almost wanting to be proven wrong so we can get it right after a few iterations.
Cool, thank you.
The main thing I could say about that is that the biggest goal in my backlog for this year is to hire a UX researcher. I want desperately, first of all, I want desperately that we establish the infrastructure that we need to do A/B testing so that I can actually observe live online, okay, this is working, this doesn't seem to be working. But I also just want to have a person who will have the time to do that user testing or usability testing that we're not doing honestly at the moment at all. Just because, like, when I did those interviews for 2 months, I was more or less doing nothing but recruiting, scheduling, doing the interviews, analyzing the interviews, communicating the results of the interviews, all of that sort of stuff. It's excellent work. I would love to do it, but I can't do that and be the UX head for the whole company. Once we have a UX researcher, I mean, I've done a lot of usability testing in the past, and I'm always going in there expecting that they're going to prove I screwed something up. And that's like coming out of a usability test where they don't show me something I didn't expect is a failed usability test for me. Like that's what I do usability testing for, because I know that I can't know exactly what's right, because I'm not actually a user in a user's context. So yeah, I'm preconceived ideas. I mean, one of the first things with preconceived ideas is, like I said, I always say no at the beginning so that people will just stop and start thinking instead of just, we have a solution, please build this. I always say no to that because I want to really understand what's the problem. And then once we think we have a solution, I want to understand what's wrong with it and make it better.
Sure. Thank you both.
Matt. Do we have any final questions from our panel from our judges or from attendees?
I just wanted to be given an opportunity to answer Byron's question as well around sort of UX function within Cambridge University Press, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course, go ahead.
Cool, great. So yeah, I actually have a counterpart, which is head of UX, which would be similar, I suppose, to Matt's role. Within that team now, we have a series, or I think it's about 3 design operation managers, a bunch of sort of contingency workers, so contractors that come in as designers for us, UX designers. And we also have an in-house designer and a senior UX researcher as well. So we're drastically and quickly expanding in that area because we've seen the value of it through the projects that we've done. So all I can say, Matt, is I hope you get the support you need, because of when you start opening that Pandora's box of usability tests and things like that, it really does create a lot of work. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and is that expertise, is that approach mainly within that UX team, or how does it roll out across the organization?
So we have the UX side of the department of our sort of online experience department, as we refer to it. What happens is a lot of that UX happens within team in terms of with the product owners, with the technical guys, developers working together with the UX team. What we tend to do though is when we do usability tests, we do these kind of what we refer to as showcases. So we have like monthly showcases where we demo internally what we've been working on, the research we've conducted, what the outputs of that research have been, how it's changed perception, how it's maybe not changed perception depending on the research. So it's very much a sort of a similar relationship, I suppose, to the one that Matt and Chris have, where we're working very closely next to our technology teams with our UX designers within the product function, but then we also make sure that that's communicated out and that culture is changing across the business, because in all honesty, like I don't want to have to say no to everybody forever. I want it to be ingrained in people that we should ask the right question first, rather than just bring a solution, basically.
You want to have a developer like Chris who says no to you.
I very much enjoy.
That's the main thing Chris does. Chris changes my plans constantly.
Same. So I work very closely with our solution architects and our head of technology, actually. And we're consistently challenged on any of the designs that we're bringing in. And the main piece that he's really concerned about from a technical architecture perspective is consistency, and making sure that we're not introducing any inconsistencies across our designs, across our multiple platforms that we now have. Cambridge Core is one of our research platforms. We have Cambridge Open Engage and higher education as well. So there's a much bigger portfolio that we need to be managing now, and consistency is going to be key if we want to drive the correct user experience across the platforms.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you to all our speakers for their presentations today. I'm afraid we've run out of time now. I also just want to say a huge thank you to our judging panel, to Todd Carpenter, CEO of NISO, Russell Palmer, Assistant Director of Galileo, Andy Priestner, UX Consultant, Brian E. Ramsden, Subject Librarian at the University of Huddersfield, and Heather Staines, Publisher Outreach, Seamless Access. And just going to quickly go to, is my screen sharing?
It was, and now it's not. Now it is.
It is, excellent, okay. So yeah, so I just want to just let you know that we will announce the winner for this year's UX Award at Access Lab, which is on the 22nd of March. So follow the link to register. And just to mention that Open Athens offers UX health check service for publishers. We have a free organizational discovery tool that you can use called Wayfinder that integrates with the Seamless Access service. And we also provide support for implementation of the Seamless Access service. So if you're interested in any of those things, then do get in touch. Otherwise, thank you very much. And we'll see you on the 22nd of March.
Thank you, Jane.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.